Welcome everybody to part 7 of the ACE video blog series. I'm your host Nick Lawrence and I'm here with Dr. Lou Cuthbert from ACE, the Alliance for a Clean Environment. Our subject today, the subject in this series, is Exelon's evacuation time estimate. It sounds like a lot of things, but Dr. Cuthbert's going to explain to us what that means. Dr. Cuthbert, what is an ETE?
An ETE is an estimate of what would be involved, required, how it might work, what the logistics could be in the event of an evacuation based on a problem at Limerick Nuclear Plant.
On an evacuation.
Right.
So, I mean, the time it would take for people to be evacuated, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the parameters? I mean, do they have to be, 5 miles away from the plant, 20 miles away from the plant? What does that mean?
Well, the current zone is 10 miles, and I think we've said pretty clearly in a number of previous parts in this series that that's much too small because people could be harmed much farther out, 30 or 50 miles. We're recommending a 50-mile zone be approved. Just by means of introduction, Nick, this particular estimate was supposed to be on file in 2011, and there was nothing. We started asking to see this sometime after that. It was finally completed through a consultant and submitted December of 2012. So this is a pretty recent document. There are some just unbelievable problems with this document as we go through this segment. We're going to be talking about why this is important because if we have a problem, there's going to be this gigantic radioactive plume and it's going to go somewhere.
Right, exactly.
And a lot of people are going to be in this plume. But this particular document, which was done by a consultant for Exelon, for Limerick, is just riddled with all kinds of unwarranted assumptions, unworkable suppositions, inconsistencies and inaccuracies, which we're going to point out, which are just unbelievable. This looks more like a third or fourth, maybe a fifth grade report than it does like something prepared by consultants. We've characterized this as self-serving fiction, and this should be just rejected out of hand by all elected officials and by the NRC, Nick.
You may be going to get into this, Lou, but I mean, is there a time frame between the time that there's an accident, people find out about it, and then does the estimate say how long it's going to take people to get out of this area that has the problem? Is that too many questions?
Well, no, those are really good questions, and people have been asking those questions for a couple of decades. The first front end of that question is, who's going to be notified when and what sequence, and is it going to be timely? And in our experience, the answer is it will not be timely. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at what happened at 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima to know that we're not going to get timely immediate notification, which explains why one of the things we say must happen is immediate notification. The second half of your question is equally insightful, Nick, because that asks the question, okay, what happens? What happens when a problem occurs? And this estimate would suggest several things that simply aren't going to work, can't work, they're just flat out not accurate, incorrect, erroneous information. One of the things that we need to be mindful of is the first half hour, the first 30 minutes of a radiological event is prime time, so to speak. If you learn about something immediately, you need to make a decision and then take action as quickly as possible, within 30 minutes preferably. If you don't know about it for days, you're subject to whatever happens and you will be suffering at the hands of both Exelon and the NRC in terms of
and that's what I'm thinking.
Errors.
People are going to get concerned. Okay, so if the critical time is the first half hour, it's almost like what happens when people have a stroke.
Right.
They say if you have a stroke, you need to get to the doctor right away, otherwise the chances of surviving it become less. So if it's a half hour and then we don't hear about it for 2 or 3 days, I mean, what happens in all that time? People are exposed, right?
Absolutely exposed, absolutely at risk. One of the things that we learned by looking at this plan, Nick, is one of the things that we're most concerned about. We're talking about 65,000 children or more are going to be at risk if something really goes wrong here. We're talking about 230 or more schools and daycares. Now, if something happens here and students are moved, a lot of them are going to be moved to 10 miles or 10.5 miles from the site, which is not far enough. And a lot of those children are likely to be in the middle of the plume, in the middle of wherever that cloud of radioactive exposure is moving. And we know pretty clearly that we need to move 50 miles, not 10.
I mean, it's just amazing to me that it is like fiction, you know, or maybe they're thinking, well, this will only happen in the summertime. The kids will already be home, and we won't get affected by that. I mean, it is so ridiculous that people can even come up with these things and assume that the public's going to buy it.
Well, yeah, even the best case scenario is just a total nightmare. The worst case scenario is just total disaster. I mean, just let's take a look at just a couple of specifics here. Vehicles. All right? Okay. If something happens, I think Donna in previous segments showed images of what's going to happen on 422.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's think about vehicles. Just let's start with school buses. Clearly, there are not going to be enough school buses to attempt to evacuate all of these children from all of these schools in a short period of time. Discrepancies are pretty obvious from just the first topic that we examined. Early in the report, and this becomes a pattern, early in the report they'll say X, and later in the report they'll say Y. Okay, let's look at school buses. Early in the report they say 1224. That's a lot of school buses.
1,224
right.
school buses.
We question whether there are 1,224 school buses available at any moment in time with a moment's notice.
Right.
But then when you go back into the report and you look at all the specific schools that are listed, well, it's not exactly as the commercial says. It's more like 1,388, close to 1,400. So you have a shortfall of buses in their own report, which is, I mean, that's problematic, obviously.
Well, somebody has to drive those buses, right?
Bingo, as they would say.
And a lot of those people are not full-time bus drivers. They have to come from whatever else they're doing. So they have to get to the buses, get in the buses, drive. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about some other kinds of vehicles in a moment, but you're right. You're absolutely right on the money, Nick. Not enough buses, not enough drivers. This is not likely to work. And if you attempt to do this pretty quickly, then what happens to all those second bus runs in a lot of school districts? Think about what would happen in a disaster if everybody's leaving. What's the likelihood that all of those buses are getting back in?
Exactly.
I mean, it's so close to zero that, I mean, it should startle every parent out there in this community who has a child in a school, anywhere. The other thing is time and distance, which are pretty important factors when you're trying to avoid a disaster or save your family. A couple of things that come up in this report are additional discrepancies. Just one example here. We're talking about variations in evacuation times and speeds that make no sense. I mean, my guess is that most fifth graders, who live in this area could have done a better job with this than this consultant. Whatever they got paid, it was too much in my judgment. But two school districts, contiguous, next to each other, evacuating at the same time. Pottstown and Pottsgrove. Okay? That accounts for a lot of students. Pottstown, 11 minutes to the boundary of the EPZ, which is 10 miles. Traveling at 48 miles per hour in this report. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be anywhere near all those school buses if they attempt to drive at 48 miles an hour through the entire borough of Pottstown. I mean, every bus would break the law. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It can't happen. At the same time, this estimate says, well, Pottsgrove's going to do a little bit better in terms of observing the law. They're going to travel at 8.4 miles per hour. Yeah. They're also going to travel about 9 miles to get to the border, but it's going to take them 65 minutes. Okay, so if I'm a parent of a Pottsgrove student watching this video blog, I'm going to say, hey, wait a minute, why are you suggesting it's going to take 54 minutes longer to get my son or daughter out of the EPZ? Makes absolutely no sense. So the discrepancies are just blatant. I mean, we went through and we looked at all these lists, and all the while that this is happening, Nick, guess what? Lots of those kids are going to be sitting on buses in the plume being radioed.
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, are they allowing for the human factor of people's emotions? The time that if somebody hears that there's been an event that takes place, people are not just going to say, well, we'll just wait to find out what's going on. If they're thinking about their kids, they're going to want to take action on their own. And people they're not informed about this stuff. It's just like any other thing where people panic when something goes on. And this is, this could be, incredible panic for people.
This could be unprecedented.
This is what I mean, and there's no...
Absolutely. Just on the basis of schools, school children, and school buses alone, this plan should be rejected and this plan should be closed. But if that weren't bad enough, Nick, let's turn the page and let's talk about another whole category of population, and vehicles, and we're still in vehicles.
Right.
What about ambulances and vans for special populations? Let's talk about the need there. This report suggests up front about 442 ambulances and vans are going to be sufficient to deal with the couple of hospitals that are in the zone,
Right.
and some specialized populations. We're talking about a detailed list later in this report, Nick, that lists over 1,700 ambulances and vans by specific facility. You're talking about Pottstown Hospital, Phoenixville Hospital, the Montgomery County Rehabilitation Center, and the Veterans Center. The Pottstown Hospital alone is listed as requiring 332
Well,
ambulances.
this is what I'm thinking. It's so ridiculous.
It's not possible. There aren't that many ambulances anywhere in the region, much less close enough to Limerick to get them in place to do something. Then there's an inconsistency with prisons. I mean, just think about all the people in hospitals and rehabilitation facilities and assisted living and nursing homes. I mean, that would just be a logistical nightmare.
Right.
But now let's talk about two prisons within this zone. Montgomery County Prison is scheduled to evacuate 1,200 inmates using 100 vans and buses. And it's not clear where those vans and buses are going. I don't think I want a vehicle full of prison inmates riding side by side with the school bus that my child or grandchild is in.
Right.
So that's a serious problem. Then you have Greater Ford Prison, which is within the zone, not that far. In Greater Ford, they're not planning to evacuate. They're planning to shelter in place. Well, guess what that means to every corrections officer and other
They're going to
employee.
be there as well.
Yeah.
They're going to have to be there
That's
as well.
right. Fasten your seatbelt, lock the door, you're staying. You're not going anywhere.
I'm speechless. I mean, really,
Yeah.
it really does, as they say, boggle the mind that people could come up with something like this and assume that it can work.
Well, I guess
It can't work. The only thing
No.
that can work is shutting the plant down. That's what I'm hearing.
Of course. And I think the only hope that this report and Exelon have is that most people are just too busy to pay attention to this. Because if they look at it, they're going to say, what are you thinking? What could you possibly be thinking? Let's talk about another category here. Let's talk about transit-dependent population, people who don't have cars. I mean,
Right.
there are people out there who don't have cars.
Exactly.
Or they may be in a place where their car isn't. This particular report, ridiculously, Nick, suggests or assumes that 99.9% of all people in the 10-mile evacuation zone have access to a vehicle, and they're in the vehicle, and they're on their way. They're talking about 0.015% of the total population who need transportation. I mean, that's just absurd. But even that absurd small number is 4,500 people, Nick. Okay, so where do they go? And how do they get out of here? This particular estimate, this wonderful work of fiction, suggests 150 bus trips to evacuate these people. Well, guess where those buses are, Nick? They're transporting the kids or some of the prisoners. So, I mean, this is just absolutely insane. Our question is, who gets left behind, folks? Who doesn't get a ride out of this radioactive plume?
Sounds like a lot more people than anybody could imagine.
Oh my God.
We just have about 30 seconds or so. I think you give out the website so people can come and watch this, so they can get the detail. There's so much more information on the website. Tell everybody where that is.
We're at www.acereport.org, and all of this will be on the website. A couple of quick thoughts here, Nick. Obviously, this is not going to work. This is just riddled with all kinds of problems, holes, assumptions, and errors. And the plan obviously can't work. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we encourage elected officials to push for a 50-mile EPZ. Elected officials are the key. Call, contact, email, write, knock on the door of every elected official you can find. Close Limerick as soon as possible. Push for immediate notification, expand the evacuation zone to 50 miles, and expand the ingestion pathway zone to 100 miles. That's our only hope.
Thank you so much, folks. Continue to watch this series that we're doing here on ACE's blog video, and we'll be back with another segment.